War Zone Charadon is the first campaign series of 9th edition, chronicling the assault of Forge World Metallica and its neighboring systems by the forces of none other than Typhus himself under the orders of Abaddon the Despoiler. It provides new narrative missions and crusade options, as well as new rules for several sub-factions of current armies. Hey everyone, it's Adrian from Tabletop Titans here today to talk about War Zone Charadon and ask myself the question, is it competitive? Its spiritual predecessor, Vigilus, was a wildly impactful book on the competitive meta, really contributing to some of the top armies and vastly changing some of the most popular builds. Now we have a few notable detachments from Vigilus that I think are worth mentioning. We have things such as the Dreadwa, one of my personal favorites, that introduced the infamous shock attack, souped up shaka, the relic shock attack gun, that had the ability to do a ridiculous amount of mortal wounds that stacked really well with things like more DACA, all these amazing stratagems, and the ability to actually shoot the gun twice. It was an absolute terror on the competitive scene. The Emperor's Fist Tank Company. This is probably best known for its relic Hammer of Sunderance. This is a relic battle cannon that basically shoots the equivalent of thunder hammers. You can imagine how powerful this was when you could pair it with a Lehman Russ tank commander that would max out its shots. Emperor's Wrath. This is another amazing Astra Militarum detachment that would give the capability for some tanks to double shoot, in addition to unlocking the ability to perform suppressing fire, slowing the movement of key units like things like these infamous big units of boys. The Genestealer Cult were probably one of the most affected when the Vigilus book was taken off the shelves for competitive play, and there were two detachments that you would see in virtually every single Genestealer Cult army. You have the Anointed Throng. This was a detachment all about aberrants, and it made sure that essentially no matter what happened, the aberrants would get some of their money back. They would either be able to fight, or in this case, use a stratagem to be able to fight on death. Incredibly powerful ability that really took aberrants to the next level. The other detachment for the Genestealer culture is the Deliverance Brood Surge. This one was all about acolytes. It would provide additional bonuses for charging, rerolls, and bonuses. Just absolutely a great way to deliver them reliably at a time at which this was extremely important in the meta. These armies saw significant boosts and changes to their own capabilities and suffered greatly when Vigilus was eventually phased out of match play. So the question arises, is War Zone Charadon the true spiritual successor to the Vigilus campaign system? Will it have as wide and important an impact on the competitive scene as the Vigilus series did? Let's take a look. So the armies in the book are largely divided into two types of armies. We have the Armies of Renown, and we also have the actual army supplements. The Armies of Renown are ultimately highly specialized armies that can fit a narrative purpose, but at a very, very steep cost. That's that you're essentially exchanging some options for another option. The army supplements, on the other hand, simply add rules to your army. They say, okay, you're playing Cult of Strife, you get these additional strats, you get these additional relics and warlord traits, a couple of restrictions like you might have to have a detachment, but that's it, right? This is essentially like just having more rules for whatever army it is that you're playing. So let's talk about Armies of Renown. These new armies are super fun and thematic, but overall lacking in what it takes to compete. They each have some interesting options, but at a cost that is ultimately too much to be of use. Let's take a look at each of them. One thing that I do want to mention that Games Workshop was very smart about was the fact that all the restrictions for the Armies of Renown carry over to your entire army. In the past, we had things like formations, detachments, things like that would have these certain requirements and stipulations on only a single detachment. For example, we have Typhus's Terminus Est Army of Renown. In the past, this might have had a rule that said you can't have any vehicles in this detachment, and so competitive players would get around this by essentially running a detachment full of vehicles. But now, James has learned his lesson. All these armies have restrictions that apply to your entire army, right? And this is actually a smart move if they truly are trying to restrict players to the confines of this thematic army. The Mechanicus Defense Corps has amazing abilities, such as -1 damage on Cataphrons and Castellans from shooting when they're fully next to an objective or fully in their deployment zone. Additionally, they can always set to defend regardless of being on a specific piece of terrain. Really cool stuff. But ultimately, at the cost of not being able to run any Scutari units as well as losing their own Forge World trait, this beat stick of an army has very little utility units to play the game with, which largely exist in the Scutari half of the army. This is a very nasty army, however, and it's likely to be a strong gatekeeper at army at events, where its sheer firepower and durability will stop certain players in their tracks. So while it's not likely to win any big events, it will be something to be aware of when you're competing. As I mentioned, Typhus's Army of Renown, the Terminus Est, is similarly restrictive, in this case not allowing any vehicles in the entire army, and of course requiring you to be Harbingers, and if you have Typhus in your army, he must be your warlord. Let's take a look. Ultimately, the few utilities you gain don't make up for the fact that you have to take one of the least competitive plague companies and forgo some of the army's best tools, such as plague burst crawlers, drones, or even dreadnoughts. On top of that, for an army of renown that is supposed to be abound with Undending Tides of the living dead, they sure make it hard to play them. Not only do they not lift the 1-to-1 ratio of Poxwalkers to Bubonic Astartes requirement, but many of the key abilities simply do not work on them, such as the upgraded strategic reserves, which allows you to instead deep strike reserve units, but only if they have the Bubonic Astartes keyword. I have to say, this is one of the ones I was the most excited to see the rules for, but I think is actually one of the biggest flops. It's not particularly fun to play. A lot of the cool kind of narrative things I was looking forward to playing with them, as far as the Unending Tides, just doesn't work, or it's not there. It doesn't encourage you to play the way that they actually play in the narrative. And so not only is it not particularly competitive, but it's also not that narrative in my opinion. So sadly, this one was kind of a flop all around in my opinion. The last Army of Renown is the Freeblade Lance. This of course is all about the trope of having these amazing heroes coming from all over the land, reuniting to fight a big foe. This one is, again, very restrictive. Naturally, you have to all be free blades. They lift the restriction on a single free blade, and it gives you more qualities, less burdens, but again, at the end of the day, at the cost of having a household bonus, this is a pretty big hit, especially when you're looking at things that Raven gained, the things that Krast already has that makes them amazing. This one is pretty thematic and interesting, but again, not truly competitive. So it's clear to us that these are for narrative and campaign play, but not competitive play. Ultimately, they're just not unique and not fun enough. They're not wild enough, and they're kind of in between this narrative campaign play and this competitive play, where some of these armies, such as the Mechanicus Defense Cohort, will absolutely stomp in a narrative game, but not really have what it competes. So we're not really quite sure where the intent is on some of these armies of renown. So if the armies of renown are largely uncompetitive, where then do the supplements of the book lie? Let's take a look. Now we're going to take you through the 3 supplements of the book. This is where the real juice of it is. At the same time the Freeblades got some love, House Raven also received a welcome boost to their sub-faction. This supplement has some real gems in it, such as a relic 3 damage battle cannon that is assault, and thus can be shot after advancing without penalty thanks to the House Raven trait, and several strats for helping the frustrations that inevitably arise from using blast weapons with a variable number of shots. You get such bonuses as rolling additional shots to simply gaining rerolls. There are a number of strats that help these kinds of weapons. Now the question when looking at these strats, of course, is how do they stack up against the Order of Companion stratagem, and why am I not just using that instead? The interesting thing about these strats is that they are all relatively cheap for smaller knights. Things like the Questoris class, as well as their Armigers, all cost a single command point, whereas there are upwards of 2 to 3 command points for the Dominus class. This makes them fantastic and cheap strats that help out your other knights, while your Big Daddy can, of course, still continue to take advantage of Order of Companions, because they have so many weapons, you really get a lot of bang for your buck on that. So overall, this is a really cool and fun supplement that's a welcome boost to a much-loved faction, but at the end of the day, it's not quite enough to take them to the same level as House Krast, and ultimately, Knights are having a tough time competing overall, so it's not really enough to make them competitive, but it is going in the right direction. So if you're like us, you opened up the pages of War Zone Charadon, took a look at the new Metallica abilities, and then immediately cracked open your Adeptus Mechanicus book to take a look at what the heck the actual trait is for Metallica, because you honestly just didn't know. Metallica was an obscure forge roll, to say the least, with a lack of punch and general attractive options that would take one away from Mars, Styges, or even Ryza Lucius, and so it wallowed in anonymity for some time. This supplement is a fantastic boon to the sub-faction, garnering them a set of amazing utility abilities, as well as the ever-sought-after ability to throttle damage at key moments. There are some key things worth mentioning about this new supplement. They gain the ability to auto-advance 6 inches, which is a game-winning ability that every Age of Sigmar player would recognize and respect. Radioactive Emanation is an incredible ability that grants an aura of -1 toughness that can be put on a support character. Metallic and Lung. This is an incredible relic that grants a 3-inch bubble of rerolling wounds to wounds in melee. It's an unprecedented ability in an army that up until now has only been able to gain rerolls to wound through Forge World Ryza in melee. And last of all, Blaring Glory. This is a 1 command point strat to turn off rerolls in an enemy unit. If you fought against armies with similar abilities, such as Mortarian's Anvil, you know exactly how powerful this ability is. So this one's an absolute hit. This is a fantastic boost to a much forlorn Forge World, really bringing them up to the next level, and I think giving them the juice to compete against some of the top Forge Worlds, such as Mars. If you're looking for a fast, flexible, mixed army that has good melee, good shooting, then I would definitely take a look at Metallica Forge World after this new supplement. And last of all, we have the Cult of Strife. This sub-faction probably needs no introduction, as it's been absolutely tearing up the internet as people talk about all the wild and amazing combinations that you have, hot on the heels of the Drukhari Codex, where it was already one of the more interesting sub-faction abilities. This all-star lineup of warlord traits, relics, and stratagems takes an already powerful sub-faction and boosts it to god levels of power. The incredible warlord traits, from rerolling failed wounds to essentially getting a do-over with your failed attacks, are incredible abilities on an already undercosted succubi. The relics, while underwhelming overall, contain one absolute gem in the shape of Morvaine's Agonizer, which is a relic agonizer, obviously, that prevents enemy units from falling back after being hit by this weapon. Now normally this would be a cool ability on the wrong type of unit, a succubus, but in the stratagem section, the Cult of Strife gains the ability to grant a relic to a Hecatrix, thus putting this ultimate utility tool on the perfect unit. A fast, flexible unit of witches with the Hecatrix buried behind 9 to 19 wounds. The stratagem section, of course, continues this amazing trend of game-changing abilities. With Invigorated by Evisceration, units of Witches, Hellions, or Reavers can gain a 4+ invuln save after killing a unit in melee. Dance of Death allows a Cult of Strife unit to move through models and terrain, even in the charge phase. Art of the Kill gives full rerolls to wound on a unit, and the Blade Well Placed grants a bonus to AP across an entire unit. Lastly, Flawless Approach turns off all Overwatch against a key big unit that you can throw into a gun line to your heart's content. Overall, the supplement is fantastic and is by far the most powerful and interesting section of the book. If you're going to learn one part of this book for competitive play, definitely take a look at Cult of Strife, become familiar with it, because you're going to be seeing it on the top tables. So overall, while War Zone Charadon provides a lot of cool and fun rules, it doesn't feel like it will have the same impact as Vigilus. And only a couple sections involved will truly see competitive play at the highest levels. These supplements in the future we can probably expect to be extremely competitive. On the other hand, the Armies of Renown will have to do far better to compete. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us on this exciting adventure, taking a look at War Zone Charadon and considering, does it have the same impact as Vigilus? How does it impact the competitive meta? Let us know, of course, in the comments below what you thought. Do you think that there's going to be different impacts that we haven't discussed in this video? And also, share us your favorite stories from the old Vigilus campaign book. We'll catch you next time on the tabletop.